Hi everybody, my name is Danielle Nicole and welcome to Monetary Makeup. So if you have a fair to light, cool undertone, you can probably appreciate how difficult it is to find a quad or any sort of palette in general that matches your skin tone. Unfortunately, most of the palettes that I typically find are very warm tone. They either have an orange undertone, a gold undertone, or they're simply too deep. So I was really excited when I discovered the By Terry Beach Balm palette. Now this palette isn't brand new, however it is new. I believe it came out this summer. So I placed an order for this palette, and as soon as I opened it, I was so excited because immediately I knew there were cool shades in here. But ironically, I happened to also purchase another palette at the same time from two completely different brands, and as soon as I saw that other palette, immediately I thought, oh my gosh, this palette has to be a dupe for the By Terry Beach Balm. So instead of just reviewing the By Terry Beach Balm palette on its own, I thought we would put it head to head with this other palette that hopefully will be a dupe. Now definitely stay tuned because our topic of the day is going to be pertaining to current influencers or YouTubers, or if you are considering becoming a YouTuber or any sort of influencer, and what are a couple different tips that you definitely need to know regarding financial tips. So if you're excited to get started, don't forget to hit the like button, the notification bell, and let's get started right now. Now I am fairly new to the By Terry brand, however one of my holy grail products is the By Terry Hyaluronic Hydra Powder. So this By Terry Beach Balm palette, I have heard so many great things about not only the formulation, but the actual consistency and the overall effect that these powders have on the skin. So before we get into the dupe, let's take a look at the By Terry Beach Balm palette. So the first thing I want to mention is that this palette feels very luxurious. It is definitely on the heavier side, and look at the artwork on the outside. I know the packaging is only a small amount, however, I did just want to mention this palette is just absolutely beautiful. Sorry if I'm shining the light in your eyes. You can see the light is reflecting off of the gold. So when you open this palette up, it does have a full mirror, the exact same size as all the pans up here. So here are what the 4 different shades look like. So in the By Terry palette, as you can see, there are 2 different blush shades, a highlighter, and a bronzer. So today we are going to not only be doing a review, but I will also give you up-close swatches as well as a wear test. So this was completely random, but I just happened to be placing an order on Target and I came across this product. So this is a Pixie Quad in the shade Sugar Blossom. Now even though the packaging has completely different artwork, it's kind of funny because I find the overall packaging, minus art, is pretty similar. So let's open this up. So here are what the 4 different shades look like from the Pixie Sugar Blossom palette. Now as opposed to having 2 different blush shades, in this palette, there are 2 different highlighters, 1 blush, and 1 bronzer. Now, aside from having 2 highlighting shades in the Pixie palette versus 2 blush shades in the By Terry palette, I'm sure you can see what I mean. When I immediately opened these 2 palettes, I thought, oh my gosh, they look so similar. So before we get into the tutorial, let me show you these swatches. So on the top is the Pixie palette, and on the bottom is the By Terry palette. Now what's really interesting, you'll notice that there are 2 different shades of highlighters in the Pixie palette. So there is a champagne shade as well as a pink shade, and in the By Terry palette it's kind of a also peachy champagne shade. Now what's interesting is when you take these 2 highlighters from the Pixie palette and you kind of merge them together, they look pretty similar. So the Pixie palette is definitely much more dramatic. However, if you look at the actual color, I find they're pretty similar. Now I did the same exact thing with the 2 blushes from the By Terry palette. I mixed these 2 blush shades right here. So upon swatching both of them together compared to the Pixie palette from Target, I find that these 2 blushes look very similar. So they don't look similar on their own for the blushes and the highlighters, but I find when you combine those two shades, I think they look pretty similar. Now next, take a look at these two bronzers. Now while I don't think these are identical, I do think the overall palette is very similar. I don't know, what do you guys think? Alright you guys, I know I just got finished doing the live swatches, but I also wanted to show you up close so that way the swatches could be a little bit more helpful. So what I did was I mixed the two blush shades from the By Terry palette, and then I mixed the two highlighter shades from the Pixie palette. So let me show you what these all look like. Okay, so the very first swatch is the By Terry highlighter, and then the second swatch are the two blush shades from the By Terry powder. The third swatch is the bronzer from By Terry. So those are the 4 shades since we combined the two blushes. Next up, the fourth swatch are the 2 different Pixie highlighting shades combined, the pink and the champagne. Next up is the bronzer from the Pixie palette. And the final swatch is the blush solo from the Pixie palette. So let me get my headband on here. And I do also want to mention before we actually apply these to the face, there is no scent with the Pixie palette. However, the By Terry palette does have a rose scent. Now, you know how with some artificial rose scents, it can smell pretty awful? This literally smells like a bouquet of roses. I think it smells divine. So I always like to utilize my makeup in other areas if possible. So since I already have eye primer on, I'm going to take the bronzer from the Pixie palette on my left eye and the bronzer from the By Terry palette on my right eye. So I'm not actually sure how pigmented each of these palettes are because I have not yet applied either of these palettes to my skin. So I just dipped in about that much. I will say this bronzer from the Pixie palette does appear to be pigmented, so let's apply this to the eye. Ooh yeah, immediate pigmentation. So that is one dip so far. I'm going to build up a second layer so that way you can see on camera a little bit better. Wayne Goss number 7 brush. So same shade, dipping into the bronzer for the lower lash line. That looks beautiful. I'm just going to build it up with one more layer. So that is what 2 layers of the Pixie bronzer looks like on the left eye. Alright, next let's dip into the bronzer from the By Terry palette. Same brush, rougher number 1. I did clean these off in between. Ooh, that's pretty too. Now the one thing about this By Terry palette is that it is called the Brightening CC palette. So it'll be interesting to see if the Pixie has the same effect on the skin. So far, I'm finding each palette is equally pigmented. Okay, so we will come back to finish up the eyes in just a minute here. But as far as 2 swipes on each eye, what do you guys think? Now, I intentionally did not set my skin with any powder because I wanted to see how these powders would do over days where I just don't feel like powdering. So next, let's move on to the skin. Sephora Demi Fan number 72 brush. I am finding these are quite pigmented on each palette, which I'm pretty surprised about. Alright, so let's do the forehead first. I'm dipping in very lightly because I don't want to apply too much, so I'm not going in really hard every time. I'm just taking a tiny bit at a time. So both of these bronzers have a red or pink undertone to them, which I personally enjoy because when I tan naturally, unfortunately, I don't get that bronze goddess skin. I tend to burn pretty easily. So I'm really excited that these undertones are looking great so far. Alright, dipping back in for the cheekbones. Alright, let's see if this matches my cheekbones. Oh yeah, you can definitely see that. I think that looks great with one pass. I am going to dip in one more time. You guys know I like to build it up on camera since it's a little bit more difficult to see than in real life. Okay, now for the By Terry side, same brush, Sephora Demi Fan number 72. So let's do the forehead first again. If these are going to end up looking similar, I'm going to be so excited. So each palette thus far does seem to have a slightly luminous glow. There is no glitter in either of them, and each palette melts seamlessly into the skin. I'm not noticing any patching or anything unusual thus far. Build it up one more time. All right, let's dip in for the cheekbones. Ooh, that is beautiful. So just upon doing my cheeks, I do think that the Pixie palette is slightly more pigmented than the By Terry palette, which I heard all of By Terry's formulas are a little bit more sheer. I wouldn't say it's a super sheer formula. However, I am noticing on the cheekbones, I'm having to build up just a little bit more than the Pixie palette. Okay, so Pixie bronzer, By Terry bronzer. Next, let's move on to blush. So here's the blush shade for the Pixie palette, Sonia G Lotus Detail Brush. Okay, so I do have a feeling that this blush shade is going to be extremely pigmented and maybe just slightly, oh yeah, slightly too dark. So I barely dipped in, and take a look at that brush. There is so much product. So I'm definitely going to tap this off because we can always add more. All right, let's see what this blush looks like. Woo, that blush is pigmented. Wow. So I'm really enjoying this Pixie blush shade. I find it gives me that natural look. I always say the Michigan cold weather look once you come in from 10 feet of snow. This is what I naturally flush. So yeah, I really like the shade of this blush. All right, same brush. Next, let's dip into the By Terry blush. Now what I'm going to do here is mix the two different blush shades since I find that is what is closest to the Pixie blush. Oh yeah, look how pigmented that blush is as well. So I'm going to tap it off again. And I am cleaning these blushes in between so that way there will be no cross-contamination. All right, let's see how this blush does. Ooh, that is pretty. I love a good cool toned everything, but especially a cool toned blush. Wow, that is so beautiful. So on the skin, I do think mixing the two blushes from the By Terry palette and just using the one blush shade from the Pixie palette, I do think they look pretty similar. However, I am noticing the By Terry palette does seem to be a little bit more brightening than the Pixie palette. All right, next let's dip into the two highlighting shades from the Pixie side, just using a Real Techniques highlighting brush. So I'm going to mix the two highlighter shades, as I mentioned before. Now I did not tap my brush off, so let's see how pigmented this is. Ooh, that's pretty. So this is a very natural looking highlight. Oh, also, I'm a little bit hot from these studio lights, so I apologize if my skin looks a little bit more pink and flushed than usual. Just wanted to mention that's why I look super pink everywhere in addition to my cheeks, but let's dip in for a second time. I was expecting this highlighter to be a blinding highlight, but it's not. I find it's extremely natural looking, so that's why I want to build it up a little bit and see if we're able to get that kind of beam from within look from 2 passes. Now my oils are starting to come through under these lights, but I really like this highlighter. It looks very natural, and it's so crazy because when you swatch these highlighters, I'm going to do it one more time, they are beaming highlighters. So I'm just shocked that they're not picking up that way on the face. So I wouldn't be intimidated by these highlighters. Okay, I just cleaned off my brush, so now let's dip into the By Terry highlighter. Okay, so this is much more, I'm assuming much more pigmented. A lot more product came up on this one, so I'm going to tap a little bit off. All right, let's see what this highlighter looks like. Okay, so interesting. I was expecting each of these highlighters to be beaming, but they're not. They just melt into the skin and kind of look like that natural lit from within glow. Thus far, from the 2 highlighting shades, I do believe that the actual highlighter from the By Terry palette, it's slightly too deep for my skin tone. I can see the peach undertone to it. It's definitely wearable. I can absolutely get away with it, but I can see a little bit of that peach pigment, whereas on the Pixie palette, it's a little bit lighter. So quite a bit of my oils are starting to come to fruition. So I'm going to use a little bit of the By Terry Hyaluronic Hydra powder. And I just have a dry sponge here. I used it for my foundation. I did not wet it today. So I'm just going to dip in a little bit. And I wanted to show you what everything looks like before, which is right now. And then next, let's see what it looks like after powder. Okay, so I'm just going to dab this powder in the center of my face. Now, typically I do dampen my sponges, but I forgot to, so we're just rolling with it. This powder is absolutely incredible. If you have any sort of fine lines, texture, blemishes, anything like that, so I'm using this sponge completely dry, and you can't even tell. I will give you guys a close-up of my skin in just a moment here, but it just blows me away the difference in certain powders. As I mentioned before in previous videos, I never used to wear powder until I discovered this one, as well as the Huda Cupcake powder. That's another good one, but this is my #1 favorite. All right, starting to look better. I was getting pretty dewy there. Okay, so I just finished powdering with a dry sponge, so I'm going to lean in a little bit so you can see the difference from the Pixie versus By Terry side. I don't know, you guys, so far I feel like they look very similar on the skin. Oh, I'm so excited. But next I'm going to finish up the rest of my makeup, just apply a little bit of mascara and maybe some lip gloss. We're keeping it really simple today. And then I will meet you back here for the topic of the day as well as the wear test. Hi everybody, welcome to the topic of the day. So you're thinking about becoming a YouTuber or an influencer, Or perhaps you just started YouTube. So if you're thinking about becoming a YouTuber or you recently started a YouTube channel, then you're definitely going to want to stick around for these 2 tips. So the first tip I have for you is to open up what's called a DBA. So a DBA stands for Doing Business As. So this allows you to basically open up your own business. Yes, YouTube is nowadays a business. Now, opening up a DBA will give you many more options as opposed to waiting to the last minute until you get monetized. Now, you can, of course, wait until you get monetized, but you know me, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. My second tip for YouTubers is regarding taxes. Now, I'm a financial professional. However, I still really understand the value that CPAs offer. So I typically work directly with the CPAs of my own clients. Now, if you are new to YouTube or you're new to being self-employed, which basically is what being a YouTuber is, then you're probably used to collecting a paycheck every couple of weeks or every weeks, and then at the end of the year, you typically file your taxes. However, once you open up a DBA or you become self-employed, hence YouTube, then instead of waiting to file your taxes once a year annually, I highly recommend putting tax money aside and filing your taxes quarterly. Now, always make sure you check with your own CPA, but sometimes there can actually be extra charges for taxes if you do them annually as opposed to doing them quarterly. So every single time you earn any sort of paycheck regarding YouTube, I highly recommend opening up a separate account, a separate bank account that is. Because saving money for your taxes quarterly can be very helpful. That way at the end of the year, you don't have to try and guess what you then owe the government. Now, the reason I recommend opening up a separate bank account that is only used for transactions of debits and credits for your self-employment is because this makes it very easy to keep track of transactions. That way you know when you go to file your taxes, if there's any sort of discrepancies or receipts you may need, you have them all listed out in that one account, and that way you don't have to try and decipher what is personal versus a business transaction. So I really hope those two finance tips were helpful for you, whether you already have a YouTube channel or you're thinking about starting a YouTube channel. As always, please comment monetary makeup down below in the comment section and let me know if you have any questions. Just a reminder, always talk to your own financial advisor and CPA because everyone's situation is unique. All right, I will meet you back here at the end of the night for my final thoughts and a wear test. Hi you guys, so I apologize for cutting in unprofessionally, but I just got home from work and I wanted to show you up close what my makeup is looking like so that way you can see the Pixie versus by Terry. I have 0 daylight outside. It is pitch black, so this is the best lighting we're going to get, but here you go. So Pixie by Terry. I mean, even look at my eyes. These two shades look almost identical. And even the cheeks and the highlighter, see how beautiful that sheen is? So that's the Pixie. Oh, I have my earpiece in, sorry. And then that is the by Terry. I mean, in real life, I cannot tell a difference. I am so thrilled with each of these palettes so far. So again, apologize, just want to jump in and show you what everything is looking like in real life. Hi everybody. Okay, so I just got home from work and it is snowing so hard out. So I'm sure my hair is an absolute mess, so you can just ignore that. So before I give you my thoughts, let me zoom you guys in so you can see what my skin is looking like. So this is what my skin is looking like after just over 9 hours. So again, we had Pixie on my left and by Terry on my right. So tell me what you guys think. Do they look different? Do they look the same? What do you guys think? So I am so excited that I just happened to place these two separate orders. When I was purchasing them, I was not thinking anything about them being similar. I just knew that I really was interested in picking up a palette with blush, highlighter, and bronzer because as I mentioned, finding a cool undertone is very difficult. And I have to say, I am loving both of these palettes. Now, I do think that the by Terry palette overall does have a more brightening effect. I don't think the shades are really that different, so I think that really comes down to the formula. However, overall, I'm not seeing a huge difference once they're actually applied to the skin. So again, you guys are gonna have to let me know down below if they do look alike or they don't on camera. And also, overall, the formula in each of these palettes is exquisite. I have never purchased any sort of palette from Pixie, so for my first experience, I am definitely blown away. You guys know, I don't think a product is good for the price. I either think it is a good product or no, it is not, and I really recommend this Pixie palette because the formula in this palette They're so buttery and creamy, just like the By Terry palette, so they both melt seamlessly into the skin. So overall, I don't think that the By Terry palette is an exact spot-on dupe. However, I think they are pretty darn similar. Upon application of the face and at the end of the day, I cannot tell a huge difference. Even on my eyes, I have those two different bronzer shades. I can't tell a difference in person. So even though they aren't exactly the same, I do think they are extremely similar. So if you have been eyeing the Beach Bomb palette from By Terry, perhaps the Pixie Sugar Blossom palette could be a great alternative. And also, with each of these formulas, I noticed there was minimal fading on everything. I can still see my bronzer on each side. The blushes are definitely still there. And the highlighters, although they aren't beaming highlighters, they're definitely still noticeable on the skin. So if you were interested in picking up either of these palettes, I'm going to leave it up to you because I can't pick a favorite. I think they both perform wonderfully. All right, well, I really do hope the topic of the day was helpful if you are thinking about starting YouTube or you are already a new YouTuber, as well as I hope the two different comparisons of the By Terry and Pixie palette was helpful as well. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!